Toxic people don't begin with an attack. They begin with an experiment. They watch, they probe, they push. Not because they're curious, but because they're calculating. Human beings are prediction machines, and toxic people are especially invested in one question: how much can I get away with? That rude comment disguised as a joke. It's not humor, it's reconnaissance. That subtle disrespect, that's not accidental. It's data collection. They're measuring your response, your facial expression, your hesitation, your willingness to tolerate discomfort in order to maintain harmony. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Every time you excuse bad behavior, you train them exactly how to treat you. Toxic people operate using a simple principle. They escalate only when previous behavior goes unchallenged. They don't leap over fences, they test whether the gate is unlocked. This is why the first offense often seems minor, a small interruption, a dismissive remark, a broken promise, something easy to rationalize. That's deliberate, because if you'll tolerate the small violation, you've signaled vulnerability to larger ones. Most people make the same mistake. They focus on intent. They probably didn't mean it. Wrong question. The correct question is, what pattern is being established? Manipulators depend on your need to interpret rather than observe. Healthy people seek understanding. Toxic people exploit that instinct. When someone repeatedly leaves you confused, exhausted, or doubting yourself, confusion is not a side effect. It is often the mechanism. Toxic personalities use emotional reactions as intelligence gathering. Anger tells them where your wounds are. Defensiveness tells them what insecurities you carry. Over-explaining tells them you crave approval. Silence tells them you fear confrontation. Every reaction is information. This is why emotional control is your greatest defense. The person who remains calm controls the interaction. Not because calmness is magical, but because unpredictability destroys manipulation. Toxic people script interactions in advance. They anticipate apology, justification, emotional collapse. When you respond with composure instead, their script fails, and a failed manipulator becomes remarkably transparent. One of the most effective tools you can use is the strategic pause. When they bait you, do not rush to fill the silence. Silence creates psychological pressure. It forces them to confront their own behavior without your participation. A simple look followed by, "What did you mean by that?" can dismantle an entire manipulation attempt. Notice the elegance. You're not accusing. You're inviting clarification. Manipulators hate clarification the way vampires hate sunlight. Ambiguity is their oxygen. Specificity is their kryptonite. Another powerful technique is the broken record. State your boundary once. Repeat it exactly if necessary. No new explanations. No emotional elaboration. No negotiation. I won't be spoken to that way. If repeated, I won't be spoken to that way. Again, I won't be spoken to that way. Explanations are often mistaken for openings. Boundaries are statements, not debates. Toxic people frequently interpret kindness as negotiability. That doesn't mean kindness is weakness. It means unclear kindness can be exploited. Clarity, however, is nearly impossible to manipulate. Here's something crucial. Toxic individuals often become most aggressive when they sense they're losing access. This escalation is predictable. Psychologists call it extinction burst. When old tactics stop working, they temporarily intensify. The tantrum gets louder. The guilt gets heavier. The charm gets sweeter. It's all the same objective, restoring control. If you've ever thought, they got worse after I set boundaries, congratulations. Your boundaries are working. The final mistake many people make is trying to win toxic people over. You cannot heal someone through self-abandonment. Your job is not to convince them to respect you. Your job is to require it. Respect is not requested. It is enforced through consequences. And consequences are not punishments. They are decisions about your own availability. Access to you is a privilege, not a right. People who consistently violate your peace should lose proximity to your life. That is not cruelty. That is maintenance. Your emotional energy is finite. Spend it where it compounds, not where it evaporates. Because in the end, toxic people are not testing your strength. They're testing your standards. And standards, unlike emotions, should never fluctuate based on who is standing in front of you. Toxic people rarely attack without first testing your boundaries. They don't usually arrive with obvious hostility or announce their intentions. Instead, they begin with subtle probe small moments designed to measure your tolerance, your confidence, and your willingness to defend yourself. A sarcastic comment disguised as humor, an interruption when you're speaking, a request that disregards your time, or a casual dismissal of your opinion. These are not random events. They are psychological feelers. They are gathering information. Human behavior follows patterns, and manipulative people understand this instinctively. Before they invest heavily in controlling or exploiting someone, they want to know whether the person is easy to influence. They test for hesitation. They watch how quickly you apologize. They notice whether you laugh off disrespect to avoid conflict. Most importantly, they observe whether you prioritize harmony over self-respect. This is why the first violation is almost always small. If toxic people started with outrageous behavior, they would be rejected immediately. But a minor offense can easily be rationalized. You might tell yourself they were joking, having a bad day, or simply misunderstood. That moment of self-doubt is precisely what they're counting on. The more you explain away the behavior, the more permission you unknowingly grant. Every tolerated violation becomes data. It teaches them how far they can go, how much pressure you can absorb, and which emotional buttons are most effective. If you become defensive, they learn your insecurities. If you over-explain, they discover your need for approval. If you stay silent, they recognize your discomfort with confrontation. Your reaction is their instruction manual. Healthy people respect boundaries when they encounter them. Toxic people see boundaries as obstacles to overcome. They often push a little further each time, escalating gradually enough that you may not notice until the pattern is well established. By then, what began as minor disrespect may have evolved into manipulation, guilt, or emotional control. The key to protecting yourself is recognizing these early tests for what they are. Don't focus solely on the individual incident. Pay attention to the pattern. Ask yourself whether the behavior creates confusion, discomfort, or a subtle sense that you must defend your right to basic respect. Those feelings are often your first warning signs. Responding effectively does not require aggression. In fact, calmness is far more powerful. A simple, direct response, "I don't appreciate that," or "let's keep this respectful," immediately communicates that your boundaries are active and enforced. Toxic individuals often rely on emotional reactions, lengthy explanations, or passive acceptance. Calm certainty gives them none of those. When someone reacts negatively to a reasonable boundary, they reveal valuable information about their intentions. Respectful people adjust. Manipulative people escalate, guilt trip, or mock your limits. Their resistance is not a sign that your boundary was wrong, it's evidence that it was necessary. Ultimately, boundaries are less about controlling others and more about defining your own standards. You cannot prevent people from testing you, but you can decide what happens next. Toxic people are always looking for unlocked doors. Your job is not to convince them to behave better. Your job is to ensure that access to your life requires respect. Their goal is not connection, it's control. That distinction changes everything. Healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, trust, and a genuine interest in understanding one another. Toxic relationships, however, operate under an entirely different set of rules. The toxic person is not trying to know you better, they are trying to figure out how to manage you, influence you, and position themselves above you. To them, people are not partners, they are assets, obstacles, or opportunities. Connection requires vulnerability. It requires honesty, reciprocity, and the willingness to accept another person as an equal. Control, on the other hand, requires imbalance. A controlling person wants the upper hand. They want to shape your perceptions, direct your choices, and regulate your emotions. If they can influence how you think, what you feel, or how you behave, they gain power. And power, not intimacy, is what they are truly seeking. This is why interactions with toxic people often leave you feeling drained, confused, or strangely off balance. Real connection energizes. Even difficult conversations can deepen trust when both people are acting in good faith. But control creates instability. It keeps you guessing. It forces you to constantly evaluate where you stand. That uncertainty is not accidental. It's strategic. Toxic people often begin by appearing deeply interested in you. They may ask thoughtful questions, mirror your values, and make you feel unusually understood. This can be incredibly persuasive because humans naturally bond with those who seem similar and attentive. But for a manipulative person, this isn't always empathy, it's intelligence gathering. They're learning what matters to you, what you fear, what you desire, and where your vulnerabilities lie. Once they understand your emotional landscape, they can navigate it with precision. They know when to flatter, when to withdraw, when to criticize, and when to reward. This creates a cycle of emotional dependency. You may find yourself seeking their approval, trying to regain their warmth, or working harder to avoid their disapproval. At that point, the relationship is no longer based on connection. It has become a system of reinforcement and control. One of the clearest signs of this dynamic is how they respond to your independence. Healthy people celebrate your growth, your boundaries, and your autonomy. Toxic people often feel threatened by them. They may become distant, defensive, or even hostile when you make decisions without consulting them. Why? Because independence reduces their influence. Control also explains why toxic individuals often resist accountability. Admitting fault requires surrendering power, even temporarily. It places them in a position of vulnerability, something they work hard to avoid. Instead, they may deflect, deny, or reverse blame. Their objective is not to solve the problem, but to maintain dominance within the interaction. Understanding this can be liberating. It allows you to stop personalizing their behavior. Their manipulation is not evidence of your weakness or inadequacy. It is evidence of their priorities. They are pursuing leverage, not love. The most effective response is not to outplay them at their own game. It is to refuse to participate. Clear boundaries, emotional neutrality, and a willingness to walk away remove the very thing they seek control over your inner world. Because once you recognize that their goal was never connection, you stop trying to earn it. And that is the moment their power begins to disappear. Every small violation is a psychological probe. It may seem insignificant in the moment, a joke at your expense, a casual interruption, a backhanded compliment, or a promise broken with a shrug. On the surface, these incidents appear too minor to warrant concern. That is exactly why they are so effective. Toxic people understand that major violations trigger immediate resistance, but minor ones often slip past our defenses. We rationalize them, excuse them, or dismiss them as misunderstandings. Meanwhile, the other person is paying very close attention. These small moments are not always random. They are tests designed to gather information. A manipulative person wants to know where your boundaries are, how strongly you enforce them, and what it takes to make you uncomfortable. They are essentially conducting a live experiment. The question they are trying to answer is simple. How much can I get away with? Your response provides the data. If you laugh when you feel insulted, they learn that social pressure can override your discomfort. If you apologize when they inconvenience you, they discover that guilt is an effective tool. If you remain silent after being disrespected, they interpret that silence as permission. Each reaction teaches them something valuable about how to interact with you in the future. Healthy people don't need to test your limits in this way. They naturally respect them. When they accidentally cross a line, they correct course once you communicate it. Toxic people, however, often view boundaries as negotiable. They aren't interested in where the line is, they're interested in whether the line moves. That is why the first few interactions with a toxic person can feel oddly unsettling. Nothing dramatic has happened, yet something feels off. Your instincts may detect the pattern before your conscious mind does. A subtle sense of discomfort, confusion, or tension is often your internal alarm system recognizing a boundary test in progress. Manipulative individuals frequently rely on plausible deniability. Their comments are ambiguous enough to be defended. I was just kidding. You're too sensitive. I didn't mean it like that. These responses serve two purposes. First, they allow the toxic person to avoid accountability. Second, they encourage you to doubt your own perception. When you begin questioning yourself, their influence increases. The escalation is gradual by design. If you accept one small violation, they often attempt another, slightly larger one. Over time, this can create a pattern where disrespect becomes normalized. What once would have shocked you now barely registers. This is how emotional boundaries erode not through one major event, but through repeated micro-breaches. The solution is to recognize these moments early. Pay less attention to whether an act seems big enough and more attention to how it affects you. Discomfort is information. Confusion is information. If something consistently leaves you feeling diminished, defensive, or off balance, that matters. Responding firmly at the first sign of disrespect is not overreacting. It is establishing the conditions under which you are willing to engage. A simple, calm statement can be incredibly powerful. That doesn't work for me, or let's keep this respectful. Toxic people are always gathering intelligence. The good news is that you are sending information as well. Every time you enforce a boundary, remain composed, and refuse to excuse disrespect, you communicate something unmistakable. This is not an easy system to manipulate. And most toxic people, when denied easy access, look elsewhere. Your emotional reaction becomes their roadmap. Toxic people pay extraordinary attention to what affects you, not because they care, but because emotional responses provide valuable intelligence. Every visible reaction, anger, embarrassment, defensiveness, guilt, or anxiety reveals something about your inner world. It exposes what you value, what you fear, and where your vulnerabilities lie. To a manipulative person, that information is incredibly useful. Most people express emotions naturally, assuming others will respond with empathy or understanding. Healthy individuals often do. Toxic individuals often do not. Instead, they treat emotions like coordinates on a map. The moment they discover what provokes you, they know exactly where to apply pressure in future interactions. Notice how certain people seem to repeat the exact behaviors that upset you most. That's rarely accidental. If criticism makes you defensive, criticism becomes their preferred weapon. If withdrawal makes you anxious, they become inconsistent with attention. If guilt motivates you, they learn to weaponize disappointment. They are not just reacting to you, they are studying you. This is why toxic relationships often feel eerily repetitive. The same arguments, the same emotional triggers, the same exhausting cycle. Once they identify your pressure points, they return to them again and again because predictable reactions create predictable control. Anger, for example, can be highly informative. When you lash out, you reveal exactly what matters most to you. Defensiveness exposes insecurities. Over-explaining signals a strong need for approval or understanding. Even tears can tell a manipulator which tactics are most effective. They are not necessarily trying to understand your feelings. They are measuring your susceptibility. This does not mean emotions are weaknesses. Emotions are essential. They provide insight, motivation, and connection. The danger lies not in having emotions, but in displaying them impulsively to someone who intends to exploit them. A toxic person often provokes emotional reactions intentionally. They may make a subtle accusation, offer a backhanded compliment, or create uncertainty just to observe your response. Think of it as shaking a tree to see what falls out. Whatever drops your insecurity, your anger, your desperation becomes useful information. Once they have that information, they can refine their approach. If one tactic doesn't work, they try another. If guilt gets results faster than criticism, they'll use guilt. If silence creates more anxiety than confrontation, they'll go silent. Over time, their methods become increasingly precise because your reactions have trained them. The most effective countermeasure is emotional discipline, not emotional suppression discipline. There is a difference. Suppression ignores feelings. Discipline manages their expression. When you pause before reacting, you interrupt the data collection process. When you respond calmly instead of impulsively, you deny them the information they seek. A neutral expression, a measured tone, or a simple interesting can be profoundly disorienting to someone expecting an emotional performance. Manipulators thrive on predictability. If they can predict your reaction, they can often control the interaction. But when your responses become calm, deliberate, and difficult to read, their strategy begins to collapse. This is why composure is so powerful. It doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means you choose what to reveal and when to reveal it. You remain in control of your own internal landscape. Ultimately, the goal is not to become emotionless. The goal is to become unreadable to those who would misuse your emotions. Your feelings belong to you, not to anyone seeking leverage. When toxic people can no longer use your reactions as a roadmap, they lose their most reliable navigation system. Boundaries are most effective when they are calm, clear, and consistent. Many people imagine boundaries as dramatic confrontations, raised voices, ultimatums, or lengthy explanations. In reality, the strongest boundaries are often the quietest. They do not rely on force, persuasion, or emotional intensity. They rely on certainty. A boundary is not an attempt to control another person's behavior. It is a declaration of what you will and will not accept in your presence. Calmness is essential because emotional reactivity can weaken your position. Toxic people often expect anger, defensiveness, or over-explaining. Those reactions provide opportunities. They can redirect the conversation, accuse you of overreacting, or manipulate the emotional tone. Calmness denies them that leverage. A steady voice communicates confidence. It signals that your decision is not impulsive or negotiable. It simply is. Consider the difference between saying, "Why do you always treat me like this? I've done nothing wrong," and saying, "I won't continue this conversation if you're speaking to me that way." The first invites debate. The second establishes terms. One seeks validation, the other enforces standards. Clarity is equally important. Vague boundaries are easily ignored, misunderstood, or intentionally twisted. Statements like "be nicer" or "I need more respect" may feel honest, but they leave too much room for interpretation. Clear boundaries specify behavior and consequence. Do not raise your voice at me. If it happens again, I will leave. There is no ambiguity. The other person knows exactly where the line is. Manipulative people thrive in gray areas. Ambiguity allows them to pretend they misunderstood or to exploit loopholes. Precision removes those options. It transforms your boundary from a suggestion into a standard. Consistency is what gives boundaries their authority. A boundary enforced only occasionally is not a boundary, it is a preference. If you tolerate a violation one day and object the next, you create uncertainty. Toxic people are experts at detecting inconsistency. They will continue testing until they discover whether your limits are real or merely situational. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. You do not need to be louder. You need to be predictable. Each time the line is crossed, the same consequence follows. No arguments. No exceptions based on mood. No repeated warnings. Just action. Consistency also builds self-trust. Every time you uphold your own standards, you reinforce the belief that you can protect yourself. That confidence becomes visible. People sense when boundaries are genuine. One common mistake is over-explaining. Many people feel compelled to justify their limits, especially with difficult individuals. But excessive explanation often invites negotiation. The more reasons you provide, the more material a manipulator has to challenge. Boundaries do not require unanimous agreement. They require enforcement. Another mistake is confusing boundaries with threats. A threat aims to control someone else's behavior. A boundary defines your own response. You better stop as a threat. If this continues, I will leave as a boundary. Toxic people often react poorly when boundaries are introduced. They may mock them, challenge them, or escalate temporarily. That reaction is not proof your boundary is wrong. It is proof it matters. Ultimately, boundaries are not about changing toxic people. They are about changing your access. Calmness keeps you in control. Clarity eliminates confusion. Consistency establishes credibility. Together, they create something manipulative people find deeply frustrating: a person who cannot be easily moved. Outsmarting toxic people requires discipline, not drama. That may sound disappointing at first. After all, drama feels satisfying. It offers the fantasy of the perfect comeback, the devastating argument, the moment when the manipulator is finally exposed and defeated in spectacular fashion. But toxic people often thrive in chaos. They are comfortable in emotional turbulence. In fact, many of them are experts at creating it. If you enter the arena on their terms, you are already playing their game. Discipline, on the other hand, changes the rules entirely. Toxic individuals typically rely on predictable reactions. They provoke, you defend. They accuse, you explain. They withdraw, you pursue. This cycle gives them a sense of control because your behavior becomes a direct response to theirs. Once they can reliably predict your reactions, they can influence the entire interaction. Discipline interrupts that pattern. It is the ability to pause when provoked, to think before responding, and to choose a course of action based on your principles rather than your impulses. That pause is incredibly powerful. In the space between stimulus and response lies freedom, and toxic people hate freedom they cannot control. Drama is emotionally expensive. It drains your energy, clouds your judgment, and often leaves you replaying the interaction long after it ends. Toxic people frequently weaponize this exhaustion. While you're analyzing every word, they have already moved on to the next tactic. Discipline preserves your resources. It keeps your mind clear and your priorities intact. This often means doing the opposite of what your emotions initially demand. When you want to argue, you disengage. When you want to defend yourself, you state your position once and stop. When you want to expose their contradictions, you simply observe them. A manipulator cannot easily control someone who does not react on command. One of the most effective forms of discipline is emotional neutrality. Not coldness, not passivity, neutrality. A calm tone, minimal expression, concise answers. You become uninteresting to manipulate because you no longer provide the emotional payoff they seek. Think of it like trying to start a fire with wet wood. The sparks land, but nothing catches. Toxic people often escalate when their usual methods fail. They may become more charming, more aggressive, or more desperate. This is not a sign that you're losing. It is usually a sign that their strategy is no longer working. Discipline also means accepting uncomfortable truths. You may never receive closure. They may never admit fault. They may rewrite history, recruit allies, or portray themselves as the victim. Trying to force accountability from someone committed to avoidance is like playing chess with a pigeon. It knocks over the pieces and struts around as if it won. Your goal is not to win the argument. Your goal is to protect your peace. That often requires restraint. Not every lie deserves correction. Not every insult deserves a response. Not every invitation to conflict deserves your attendance. The strongest position is often selective participation. Toxic people count on your need to be understood. Discipline frees you from that need. You stop explaining yourself to those invested in misunderstanding you. Ultimately, drama is reactive. Discipline is strategic. Drama seeks immediate satisfaction. Discipline prioritizes long-term freedom. And freedom is the real victory, because the moment toxic people realize they can no longer control your emotions, they will start to feel the effects of your emotions on them. Consume your attention or dictate your behavior, their influence begins to evaporate. Not with a bang, but with silence. And silence, when chosen deliberately, is often the smartest move in the room.